Hi, I'm Tony Russo, and this is In Case You Missed It from Kates-Boylston for the week ending Friday, January 17th, 2025. This episode is sponsored by Passages. Looking for a way to honor your loved one while honoring the planet? At Passages, they specialize in eco-friendly funeral products made from renewable, biodegradable materials. Whether it's a stunning willow casket, a biodegradable urn for scattering, or their unique memorial keepsakes, Passages helps create a meaningful goodbye that treads lightly on the earth. Join the movement toward greener funerals. Visit passagesinternational.com and discover how you can celebrate life while protecting the planet for generations to come. Link in the show notes. In last week's episode, I talked about how I was against, not for, the whole naming and shaming thing when people have been accused of crimes. And not because of the story that I'm about to report now, but having considered it a little bit more, one of the things is if I'm going to continue to report on these kinds of things, I think it's important that I say it is this particular guy who broke this particular law, and I can report on whether or not the funeral board has held them to account as far as I can tell. I think it might be worse to just say funeral directors keep getting away with stealing from their clients or keep going to jail for stealing from their clients. I think it's important to make it a particular person, especially in this instance. And in this instance, it is Cody Anderson, who bought George Funeral Home in Aiken, South Carolina from Foundation Partners in 2018. He bought the funeral home in August of 2018, but in March of 2018, a woman named Anna Marie Abel died and was buried from that funeral home, and there was still money due. When the sale went through, Foundation Partners kept the accounts receivable, so the money from that funeral, which was about $8,700, 86.68.20 according to reports, was due to Foundation Partners, and they were responsible to collect it. However, Anderson collected it himself. He went to the family and said that not only do you owe this, but you also owe the interest, and that is $22,000 all told. The family borrowed $19,000 from friends so that they could pay Anderson. Anderson also insinuated himself into the estate by getting the probate judge to put him in charge of it. And once he became in charge of it, he did not pay the taxes on the properties that Ms. Abel owned, and they were foreclosed upon. This is all part of the suit. He has since repaid the $19,000. He repaid that last month on January 17th, just about a month ago. He repaid the $19,000, but he is also being accused of a civil conspiracy, constructive fraud, conversion fraud, and intentional infliction of emotional distress. And that's not the only problem at that funeral home. Another employee, Thomas Allen Bateman, has been named in connection with a separate case involving the purported will of another woman. Both of these men also face criminal charges. And as I think I may have mentioned, I checked on the South Carolina Funeral Board, and he has been in trouble before. You know, Cody Anderson was reprimanded for putting up a sign that said a funeral home was coming soon, even though he did not have a license to operate one yet, and he paid that $250 fine, but there are no other blemishes on his record to this date. We will continue to follow this story. I did a little bit of digging around. It's something that's gonna kind of develop over time. I might turn it into a feature, or I might just continue to report it in bits on In Case You Missed It. Either way, you will find the link to what I have so far in the show notes. Indiana is in the news this week. There were two stories that are worth talking about. One I'm working on a feature on, so I'm just going to kind of tease that. But the other one, there's no point in writing about, and I just get a kick out of the fact that there's no point in writing about it. So I'm going to be maybe a little flippant about it instead. Some poor soul, her name is Jillian Ellison. She wrote an opinion piece about why Indiana should finally legalize water-based cremation or alkaline hydrolysis, or, you know, as some people would call it, aquamation. Aquamation, of course, is a branded name. It's from BioResponse Solutions, and that is an Indiana company. There are 22 states, according to this article, that already allow alkaline hydrolysis, but the state where it was kind of born is not among them. And I think that the old school, I think that to say that old school funeral service is well entrenched in Indiana doesn't even begin to get at it. I think that Indiana would be perfectly happy to pass a law that says everyone must be buried in a coffin, and not a casket, in a coffin. Like, let's take it back, get away from all of these newfangled ideas like not burying people in a coffin. And they've been fighting this. It's just funny. They've been fighting for 15 years. The idea that a state that is very kind of anti-regulation and anti-government, you know, intervention, that's not true. We're hearing a lot about this, in the news about, you know, how, you know, regulations are going to be, you know, kind of removed. And don't kid yourself. Regulations are in place to keep the companies that are already doing well. And God bless them. That's what it's for. But anyway, it'd be fun to see if Indiana, I predict Indiana will be the 50th state to allow alkaline hydrolysis. I could be mistaken. I'd be happy to be proven wrong. But the other story that I heard today was, I'm covering a story on the appeal of Lauren Richwine, and she is a death doula who works in Indiana. I've done a large feature on her before, and I sat in on the arguments before the federal appeals court of her case. So Indiana argues that death doulas shouldn't be allowed to tell families what their rights are under you know, the funeral practices of Indiana. One of the things that she was doing was going to the arrangement conferences with families. She was also instructing families who wanted to have a home burial on how to have a home burial. And the reason I'm picking on Indiana, and I am picking on Indiana because it's certainly not just Indiana. It is kind of this weird transitional period where it seems as if in a lot of places the funeral industry thinks that by preventing other people from doing it differently, they will somehow convince people not to. And I feel like the floodgates are already opened. You know, there are an increasing number of people who aren't even funeral directors, who are just opening businesses that help people plan their celebrations, because in too many cases, people are running into funeral directors who are not, you know, I mean, I know we say every family, every time. I know we say meet families where they are. There is a catchphrase for every instance, for every instance of disposition. But the fact is that people keep running into walls that they are creating businesses to go around. And I had a really nice conversation today with Layson Barton, who works for SEI, and we were talking about, you know, her decision to become a celebrant back in 2011, and just how there is this kind of there was this kind of watershed moment where it's like, well, you can be a celebrant or not, but you're not going to be able to serve families as effectively if you decide that they either have to have a priest or just cremation. And so as this kind of plays out in Indiana, I think of that as kind of like the Indiana, I think, is kind of like the canary in the coal mine. And as Indiana practices as Indiana practices kind of loosen up, I think we'll see that is how the rest of funeral service goes. Whether and when that happens is another question altogether, and I can assure you that I will continue to cover these stories, and you can find links. You can find a link to the Journal and Courier story in the show notes. You're just gonna have to trust me on the Lauren Rich Ryan thing. I'll probably get a story out on that next week or the week after. We'll see how things work out. I don't know if I'd call this so much a happy ending as an ending that is not as bad as it could have been. We reported a couple of months ago about the Melanie B. Scheid funeral directors and cremation services in Lebanon County and Lancaster County, Pennsylvania. So Mrs. Scheid is part of or owns several funeral homes in the area. And when one of her partners got very sick and couldn't work, and it put them in arrears, and they were forced to file for bankruptcy protection under Chapter 11, and they did so, and and we reported on it in Funeral Service Insider in case you missed it. And so the resolution has come out, and I thought that I would share it. They are going to be able to restructure their debt, and they're going to be able to keep many of their funeral homes, but they will be selling the Lebanon County-based funeral home for $2.6 million to pay off some of the debt. The rest of it will be restructured. But I feel like this is as good a story as we could have. I mean, obviously, best case scenarios, they would have gotten to keep them all. But in this case, they'll be able to kind of keep their core together and fight back. And it's an interesting commentary on how precarious it can be for some funeral home owners, especially when, it's a one or a two person operation. If half of them get sick, it can be tough, and it's something that people should do what they can to be prepared for. I spoke recently with someone who was lucky enough to have a friend who could come in and step into their business for the 6 months that they were out hurting their back. We're going to report on that, and that's in an upcoming episode of Funeral Service Insider. It's a bonus episode with Katie Hill from Mortuary Lift Company, and she was talking about a client of hers who, hurt his back, but fortunately was able to have someone come and take over his duties. Otherwise, he could have lost his funeral home because it was just him, and he was laid up for something like 6 months. So these are some of the really difficult things that I think we don't get to talk about enough, because there's not a ton of solutions. Like, don't let anything bad happen to you, otherwise you can lose your funeral home. That's not much. That isn't much advice. Everyone is as insured as they can be, but there's just bad luck lurking out there. And when you get struck by bad luck, as this company did, and you fight your way out of it, it's worth celebrating at least the small victory of being in a position where they can still rebuild rather than being completely bereft. But there's a link to that and to the other show in the show notes. Last but not least, I would like to encourage you to please leave reviews on our podcast on the app of your choice. I guess I got one on Apple, which is the app of my choice, and it was from it's entitled Young Cemeterian, and it's from a cemeterian in Chicago, and she has so many nice things to say about the show, and I just wanted to shout her out because she's a listener. So hi, Grace. Thank you for your kind words, and we hope that you continue to stick with it and that you're having a great career. Keep up the good work. If you would like to leave one of those reviews, we'd be happy to see you do it. And if you'd like me to read your review, you can just write in the review. Feel free to read this on the podcast, and I will feel free and I will read it. Otherwise, if you have something to say that you'd like to get out of the podcast, you can do it by calling. You can dial 732-746-0233, extension 709, and that's where you can reach me, Tony Russo. Leave me a message. I will play it as long as it doesn't say anything mean about other people. If you want to say something mean about me, I would still love to play it. But if you want to say something constructive, if you want to say that you wish we did something else or something more or something different, I'm happy to take the criticism. If there's a story that you know about that you wish I would cover, again, reach me and I will do what I can. You can also email me. A link to my email address is in the show notes. In Case You Missed It is a Kates-Boylston production. It was written, edited, and videoed by me, Tony Russo. Please subscribe wherever you're listening now. Follow if you're on Apple. You should go to YouTube and at least check out my cool new studio. I worked so hard. I painted it green. I got all my little sound guys up. I don't know if you can tell the difference, but I do sound better than I sounded when I had the curtains behind me. So I'm happy to be back in my new studio and looking forward to producing so many more shows for you this year. And I'm so glad that you've stuck with me. So that'll do it for this week. We'll catch you next time on In Case You Missed It.